Hello, welcome back to the channel. Today I wanted to talk about the complete stories and poems of Edgar Allan Poe. If you are at all familiar with literature, especially American literature, you've probably heard of Edgar Allan Poe. Some interesting things about Edgar Allan Poe. So he was born January 19th, 1809, so quite some time ago. And he was an author. The thing is that he is particularly known for his Gothic horror stories. That's kind of the thing that everybody knows about Edgar Allan Poe. The image on the cover of the book itself is an image of a raven, which is the poem "The Raven" is probably one of his most often quoted and best known works that he ever did. It's an amazing poem. I particularly enjoy The Raven, especially when it is told well, when people cite it very well. There have even been some cartoons that have done Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven, and it's funny that it has gone from this macabre, spooky poem to really kind of mainstream now, and there's a lot of people who know about The Raven. Anyway, the thing is that Edgar Allan Poe actually wrote more than just these horror tales and these I shouldn't say necessarily horror, but this kind of, a lot of times when you're looking at information about Edgar Allan Poe, Gothic is one of the words that's thrown in a lot. So he did more than just create these Gothic poems and stories and things. He's actually credited with being the first person to write detective stories, interestingly enough. Let's see, I did read it here just a second ago because I wanted to get some blurbs about his facts about his life and things. So he's considered the inventor of the detective fiction genre. So the thing is that before I read this particular book, I had heard about The Raven. Obviously, it's quite well known. The Cask of Amontillado, not as well known, but one of my favorite stories that Edgar Allan Poe wrote. Mask of the Red Death and Lenore and the Telltale Heart. Those were the 5 things that I knew that he had written. But he's written so much more than that. He's written satire. He's written detective fiction. One of the stories this is the complete stories and poems of Edgar Allan Poe, so it has all of his works. But one of the stories that I read, and I had heard the title, but I did not know that title was attributed to him until I read this book. And that is the Murders in the Rue Morgue. So it's one of the very first modern detective stories that was ever written. And I had no idea. I'd heard the title before, but I didn't realize it was associated with him. And I'd never read it. I'd heard it was the Murders in the Rue Morgue. So you kind of know from that it is it's a detective story. And from there, there's a lot of other things that he wrote. The Gold Bug, for instance, is another one. This guy goes to New Orleans from Sullivan Island in South Carolina. He'd lost his family fortune. He brought an African-American servant with him. Now, again, these are all written in the early 1800s. Edgar Allan Poe did not live very long. He was born in 1809 and died in 1949. And he's actually one of the first American writers to apparently earn a living through writing. if he wasn't writing his own stuff, he was an editor and a literary critic. So he had these other things that he was interested in. But this guy William, his friend visits him to talk to him about this bug that he found, and it's like it was a living bug, and it seemed to be made of pure gold. And so they go on a hunt for this treasure that they think that might have come about, or that this bug might have been a part of or found or something like that. So the thing is that not all, see, we're all accustomed to seeing Edgar Allan Poe as this writer of horror stories or creepy gothic poems, but he did so much more than that. And I enjoyed this book from cover to cover. I had not realized the amount of work that he had produced during his lifetime. Some of the more well-known ones that Edgar Allan Poe had written. I mentioned The Murders in the Rue Morgue. It's set in Paris. There's some murders, and it's about the detective who was trying to figure out who was responsible for these murders. You have The Cask of Amontillado. This is one of my favorites. I read this back in high school, I believe it was. The first time I read it. It could have been as far back as junior high. Anyway, this centers around Montresor and Fortunato. Now, Montresor had something against this other nobleman, Fortunato. He says that it had gone on for such a long time that he'd even forgotten what it was. But he knew that Fortunato had done him wrong, and that he needed to get back at Fortunato. And Fortunato, being a wine snob, he told him that he had this cask of Amontillado, which was a particularly it was a particularly good wine, but he got it at like a price that to him it could have been a fake Amontillado, and so he wasn't sure, and he knew that if he said the right things, it would get Fortunato to come with him without suspicion. So he takes Fortunato down in these crypts, and as he starts going, it's interesting because he starts having second thoughts about what he's doing, and he tries to get Fortunato to turn back, but Fortunato is determined to go forward. And I don't know if I want to keep going with this, but it's in my mind, it's one of Edgar Allan Poe's best. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I actually saw somebody do an interpretation of this as a one-man play, and he did a great job playing both Montresor and Fortunato as he was describing the conditions of the crypt and what happened during this. The Fall of the House of Usher. This was another one that I'd heard of but hadn't connected to Edgar Allan Poe. The narrator talks about his friend Roderick Usher, and the supernatural way that Roderick's house just collapses. It's an interesting. It's not just like the House of Usher has fallen like the fall of Rome or something like that. It's a supernatural occurrence that destroys this house. There's The Pit and the Pendulum. Again, I'd heard this one, but again didn't connect it. I'd heard of the title, The Pit and the Pendulum. Actually, the first time I was introduced to The Pit and the Pendulum was in a Charlie Brown comic. Charlie Brown had been flying his kite, and he got tangled up in the tree, and he was hanging upside down from the kite string in the tree, and Lucy was talking to her brother Linus about this pit and the pendulum, and sees Charlie Brown there and uses him to demonstrate the swinging of the pendulum. But it's about a man being tortured. He's locked up in a dungeon. He can't move, and this bladed pendulum is swinging back and forth above him as it comes down closer and closer to him. But yeah, it's an interesting one. There's a lot of tales like that where there's some sort of inevitable doom hanging about the people in the story, and that doom is just going to come crashing down and destroy everything. Purloined Letter was another one of his detective stories. This one again features the same detective from the Murders of the Rue Morgue. Apparently there were three. That there was the Murder in the Rue Morgue, the Mystery of Marie Roget, and the Purloined Letter. There's a letter. It was addressed to the Queen, and this thief steals it, intending to blackmail the Queen. The Telltale Heart. Now this one, again, this one was one I had heard of. I didn't realize that it was an Edgar Allan Poe. The thing is that this one was one that I did not like. Not the reading of it, but every year in school, they would show us these really, I don't know why they did it, but they were these really creepy videos. And one of them was the Telltale Heart, where it was this guy explaining that he worked for this guy with this wonky eye, and it just consumed him to the point where he smothered the guy to death and hid the body. And then the police show up, and he can hear the guy that he killed. He can hear his heartbeat from underneath from where he had hidden the body. And he's like, why can't these detectives hear this? It's so loud. But reading the story, it was a different experience than watching the video. Once again, I have no idea why it was like every year in elementary school. We would watch this one, The Telltale Heart, and we watched The Monkey's Paw. And The Monkey's Paw, I liked that one better. It was way creepy, especially for a kid. And then there was this one, The Telltale Heart. I think I may not have liked this one because of the actor they'd cast in the role, but I don't know. Anyway, The Telltale Heart was another one. Lenore, obviously, that one is a pretty well-known poem by him. Again, a lot of his poems I had not read. I'd heard of Lenore, but I had not read it until I read this book. Obviously, The Raven, quoth the Raven, nevermore, is the one of the major lines from that's repeated through the poem. Let's see. Oh, that was the last one I kind of wanted to talk about. I love this book, and I feel that everybody who is I mean, you don't even have to be interested in this particular type of Gothic poetry, but if you liked The Raven, you're probably going to like the rest of his works. Now, that's not to say that everything is absolutely amazing. I liked reading this book, but I remember some of it a lot better than others because there's some of it that's a lot better than others. The other one that that I had read prior to reading this particular collection was The Mask of the Red Death. This one was very interesting. There was this eccentric noble, and in the city that he was in, there's a plague that the plague called the Red Death hit the town, and the noble invited all of his friends into his castle. They locked the doors and had a costume party, and at one point there was this one guest in costume that they felt was in bad taste, shall we say, because he was a symbol of this plague. He was wearing blood-stained wrappings and a mask, and it turns out that that this was actually Death himself, come as the Red Death, as this plague, because plagues have no respect towards who they kill and don't kill. It was interesting to kind of see that imagery pop up later in another book I read. If you've ever read Terry Pratchett is another one of my favorites. I particularly like his Discworld series. I have read some of the other stuff that he's done. I enjoyed Good Omens that he teamed up to write with Neil Gaiman. Strata was one of the other books that I've read by him. I'm trying to remember. Like I said, I've read some other stuff by him. Mostly I'm a fan of his Discworld series, and there's this one scene in the book where the wizards they want to know something that's happening, or they want to know what's happening because this magical effect occurred, and they have no idea what's going on. So they use this special rite called the Rite of Ashk Ente, which will summon Death and bind him so that he has to answer your question. And so Death shows up, and he's holding a plate of like hors d'oeuvres in one hand, and like he has a piece of sausage on a toothpick in the other hand. And they're like, "Were you just at a party?" And he says, "Yes." And they're like, "Okay." So they ask their questions, and he says, and one of the wizards is like, "Well, that's all. We're done. You can go back to your party. We hope you enjoy it." And he says, "Oh yes, it's very entertaining, but I think the people are going to get a surprise when we take our masks off at midnight." So it is a direct reference to Mask of the Red Death, which in this case it was turned into humor, as opposed to in the case of the Mask of the Red Death being turned to in that case horror. But even if you're not a real diehard, I really want horror, I really want to read this kind of stuff, it's excellent work. Highly entertaining. And the thing is that everybody thinks, oh, Edgar Allan Poe, he's that crazy guy that wrote the Raven, and all his stuff is dark. No, it's not. There's some stuff that's really, really good. Yes, there is some dark stuff, but there are some other things that he has written. And as I said, he's credited with inventing modern detective fiction, interestingly enough. So, highly recommended. Let me know what you thought of Edgar Allan Poe. Let me know if you've had the same experience or a different experience. I want to know. Like, subscribe, put on the bell so you get the notifications as always, and enjoy what you're reading.